Jo, over to yourself.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Very excited to be here and thank you for the invitation. Perfect. So for thousands of years, human settlement and development has been shaped by access to water. Cities have been formed around rivers, lakes, floodplains, and groundwater springs because we know that water determines how communities can be sustained. In mining, we often forget this. We build pits, plants, and infrastructure first, and only later question whether the water systems can support them. And that is where many of our biggest risks are locked in. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Josephine Weston. I'm an environmental engineer at Worley Consulting, and I specialise in hydrology, flood risk, mine water management, and mine closure. My work sits at the interface between engineering decisions, water systems, and the communities that depend on them. Alongside this technical role, I've also been involved in an initiative called the Capital Matters Program, which is a global roundtable series and brings together senior mining leaders, including CEOs, project directors, engineers, financiers, and government stakeholders, to address a persistent industry challenge: why mining continues to experience cost and schedule overruns. One of the insights that we've been consistently hearing in these roundtable discussions is that many of the uncertainties that undermine mining projects are not external, but are formed when projects are poorly defined at the very beginning. That insight lies within the theme of today's conference, creating certainty in a world of change. And today I want to focus on one aspect of mining where certainty can either be successfully achieved or compound front-end risk, and that is water. Across the Capital Matters discussions, leaders repeatedly describe the same pattern occurring during front-end planning. They are seeing scopes that are incomplete or vague, assumptions acknowledged but not tested, risks captured on registers but not embedded into decisions, and timelines set before work is genuinely understood. These weak project foundations exacerbate risk as the project moves through its life cycle. By the time a project reaches execution, teams are no longer managing risk, but they are reacting to it. And so, if project definition is where uncertainty is created, water is often where that uncertainty shows up first. Too often, water is treated as a box ticker for regulation, addressed through permitting, modelling, or mitigation once engineering concept is already fixed. But water defines the physical and operational boundaries of a mine, and it determines where infrastructure can go, how water moves across and through a site, how tailings, waste rock, and pits behave over time, what communities will accept, and of course, what long-term liability a company will carry. When water is poorly understood during project definition, the consequences are predictable, and they include late redesigns, approval delays, unplanned treatment and containment costs, operational constraints, and ultimately cost and schedule blowouts. These are often labelled as environmental issues, but in truth, they are failures of project definition. A tragic illustration of this is Samarco tailings dam failure in Brazil. As I'm sure most of us will remember, in 2015, the collapse of the Fundão Dam released vast volumes of tailings into the Doce River system, causing loss of life and widespread downstream harm across multiple regions. It has been described as one of the worst mining-related environmental disasters in history. While the technical causes were complex, the broader lessons are not. Downstream water systems were not treated as a defining project constraint early enough. Risk was assessed, but not fully integrated into core decisions. Governance existed, but system-level water thinking and contingency planning fell short. Samarco shows us what failure in planning can really look like, including early water risk definition, assumptions about containment and its consequences, and the integration of water systems into project planning. The river became the pathway for failure, and it meant that communities bore the consequences. The financial, legal, and reputational impacts have persisted for over a decade. Samarco demonstrated that water risk is financial risk, which cannot be managed retrospectively. A different but equally provoking example comes from the Pilbara in Western Australia, near Karijini National Park, somewhere that's very close to me and a special place. So Karijini is not only one of Australia's most significant national parks for its permanent gorges, springs, and water-dependent ecosystems, but it is also a place of deep cultural importance to the Banjima and Yinhawangka people, for whom water places within the landscape hold cultural, spiritual, and custodial significance. Over time, large-scale groundwater abstraction associated with mining operations surrounding the region has contributed to declining groundwater levels in aquifers connected to the park. Traditional owners and regulators have raised concerns about drawdown affecting springs, base flow, and culturally significant water places, even where mining occurs kilometres away from the park boundary. What matters here is not any single approval or licence, rather the issue of cumulative groundwater impact. Aquifers don't care about mine lease or park boundaries and decisions, and therefore made within mines accumulate in these groundwater systems. In this case, groundwater has been treated as an operational input rather than a defining constraint on what development in the region could sustainably support. The result has been increased regulatory scrutiny, opposition from traditional owners whose water places are affected, and ultimately the risk of long-term damage to a protected and culturally significant landscape. Karijini reminds us that water risk in mining is often indirect, regional, and can be time-lagged, and that when groundwater systems and cultural water values are not properly understood and integrated at the definition stage, certainty is lost long before construction begins. From my own work as a hydrologist, I see the same pattern repeatedly. We see baseline data gaps, underestimated extremes, misunderstood groundwater interactions, and closure assumptions that underestimate climate change modelling. Each time, uncertainty emerges not because conditions changed, but because they were never fully understood. In fact, as cheesy as it sounds, water doesn't wait for the next project phase. It behaves according to physics, whether the project is ready or not. If we genuinely want to create certainty, especially in a world of climate variability, water stress, and rising community expectations, we need to change how we treat water in the front end of projects. Before freezing scope or committing capital, projects should be able to pass a simple water definition gate, not just for compliance, but for project robustness. For example, do we genuinely understand the catchment and whom we share it with? Do we have defensible baseline data, not just assumptions? Have we tested designs against plausible future hydrological conditions? And do we understand long-term water and closure liabilities before locking them in? These are not environmental questions. They highlight project value and the acceptability of risk. And when we understand these constraints early enough, the scope becomes clearer, redesign reduces, approvals become more predictable, investor confidence improves, and projects become more resilient to change. This is not about slowing projects down. It's about avoiding the far greater delays and costs that arise when projects discover halfway through execution that water was never properly defined in the first place. So, as we think about creating certainty in a world of change, I'll leave you with this. When water is treated as a design input, not a risk to be mitigated later, we move closer towards mining projects that are more predictable, more resilient, and built better from the outset. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so, so much for that, Joe. Absolutely fantastic. Round of applause, everybody, for the brilliant
Thank
Josephine and
you.
Weston. Brilliant. So Joe, with this, in terms of projects, and I think, those thoughts that you left us with there, in terms of when water is actually considered as a design input rather than that afterthought or that risk that we then have to manage on the fly or retrospectively. Do you see projects changing at the moment, or are we still just not focusing on the water at all?
I think we definitely see a mix across projects. As I mentioned, a lot of projects we see the engineering is locked in and we're given designs and we do flood risk assessment on these projects when we've got engineering set in stone, essentially. But we are seeing a lot of projects where we are being brought in earlier as well. And that means that we really have the opportunity to inform these projects about sustainable design and how that they can best construct their site in relation to water and its downstream impacts, as well as how the site can be potentially protected against water and extreme flows as well. So it's exciting when we get those projects and you have a little bit more of a say in how the engineering should be constructed in relation to upstream and downstream water risks. But definitely it's still progress.
And do you, I guess, from the work that you're doing at the moment with Capital Matters, well, firstly, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what Capital Matters is? And then
Of
we can come
course.
back into, has water made an appearance in any of those discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I gave a brief summary, but Capital Matters, it's a global roundtable series convened by Worley and EY. So we've partnered with EY on this. We've just completed our fourth roundtable, and the conversation has started because EY releases their top 10 risks to mining every year. And in 2025, capital was named as the number one risk to mining. So this got us thinking about how different stakeholders in the industry are impacting capital. It's not just the engineers, it's not just the owners, it's every single stakeholder related in the sector. And so we wanted to bring together senior leaders in the sector to really understand how each stakeholder impacts and increases capital inefficiency in mining across the project lifecycle. So, yeah, we've just done our fourth roundtable. Each roundtable focuses on a different phase of the project lifecycle. So, we began in London looking at poor project planning. Then we went to Riyadh, where we dived a little bit deeper into project planning as well. Toronto, we looked at project execution. And then last week, we were in Santiago looking at ramp up challenges and commissioning. And then the conversation is going to continue later on looking at licensing and license to operate challenges. And then it will kind of summarize back in London later in the year. So this has been really good to get these senior leaders, and we're getting competitors in the room as well. We're getting different owners, getting government stakeholders to really understand how they connect with capital inefficiencies and overruns. And it's been really beneficial to be able to have this open and honest conversation with these senior leaders.
Yeah, I think having been lucky enough to have been in three of your discussions, my apologies for not being able to make it to Santiago over the
It's a
last
long
few
way.
months. It's a long way, yeah. But they've been absolutely brilliant, and I think the way in which you are running them allows for people to be incredibly honest and actually pretty vulnerable with what they're sharing. So it's really exciting, and as well. So obviously we have Critical Productions that's been then interviewing yourself and Darren Quayle and a number of the other people behind the scenes, trying to capture, without, of course, breaking any Chatham House rule, etc., what's been discussed within those sessions so that we can share them more broadly. And that as a podcast will be coming out very, very shortly, and we'll make sure we share that with everybody. But Joe, there are a number of questions that are coming in the chat at the moment. And the first one is from Mark, and Mark is basically saying excellent points. And Mark would love to hear your insights on how better water data can be collected to establish those trusted baselines, and how do we move beyond a compliance mindset to report on that water data that would be useful for decisions for, be it mining companies, governments, local community groups, etc.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Mark, for your question. So it's really interesting. We work in regions across the world. So I've worked obviously in Australia, but also in the Middle East, North Africa, and different parts of the UK and Europe. And the tricky part is water data. A lot of the time, open source data is not the best. And obviously, a lot of the mines that we operate in are in very regional and rural areas. So having a significant data set is quite challenging. A lot of the time, open source data has like maybe 30 years of data, but there are large gaps in the data sources, which makes the aggregation complicated. And then if a mine is only in the feasibility stage, they haven't themselves been able to have enough time to capture years of data as well. So that's definitely a challenge in how we're analysing from like a hydrological perspective, having these massive data gaps. So I think it's difficult, obviously, because we're working in regional and rural areas. So capturing water data is hard. But in terms of compliance, yeah, sometimes that becomes difficult. So we need to kind of, as an industry, work out a way to be capturing not just water data, but environmental data more succinctly and be able to capture it over a number of years so that we have these whole data sets as well. I'm not sure if I missed the end part about the compliance in that question, though, Sarah.
No, I mean, I think you certainly touched on it, and you'll see that Mark's asking additional questions in the chat, really leaning into, do you have any comments on the potential for mistrust of the data? So especially if the data's been collected by a mining company and then shared, actually, well, what does the mining company want to find with that data? And is there any, if somebody is there looking at the data sources, do they actually trust in terms of who's collected them, or would it be better for independent parties to collect that data, etc.? I don't know if you've got thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. So I think in terms of like the reliability and trust with data collection, I think across the board that's pretty well done. So for example, a lot of mining companies will employ, I guess, contractors or consultants to go out and undertake their sampling and collect water data. So I've gone out to mine sites before and done groundwater sampling. And so that means, I guess, having the third party there creates a sense of trust and reliability around that data, because it's not the direct company itself undertaking that data. But there's also a lot of regulatory requirements for this data collection as well, particularly when mines and other resource companies are going down the project phase. So not just in feasibility, but down into construction and ramp up and operations, etc. So from that perspective, they're touching base a lot with the different regulatory departments too. And that means that there is that trust built between the data collected, the mining companies, community, and regulators as well.
No, it's really interesting, and I think looking at a lot of the questions coming in the chat, it's almost when you're trying to build that relationship, that trust between different parties, then maybe water is one of those areas. Rather than seeing it as a problem, it's this massive opportunity in terms of building those bridges. Because if nothing else, it's certainly a common interest for all of us, isn't
Exactly. Yeah, that's
it?
yeah.
Brilliant. So with that, Joe, we could speak a lot longer on this, and the questions keep coming in the chat. So I'll point you in their direction to answer them perhaps directly. But everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Josephine Weston. Thanks, Joe.